So this webinar will begin shortly and will focus on the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 7. What is it and how can we achieve it? We have 3 very informative presentations today prepared for you, as well as a questions and answers session with questions from you, the audience. Okay, before we begin with the webinar presentations, I would like to inform you a little bit about what ISIS is and what it stands for. So ISIS stands for the International Solar Energy Society, and it is a non-profit UN-accredited membership NGO. The ISIS vision is to achieve 100% renewable energy for all, used efficiently and wisely. We represent a diverse membership of academics, researchers, energy practitioners, consultants, students, businesses, and advocates. ISIS works together with like-minded organizations from countries around the world to advance the renewable energy transformation. The presentations and the recording of this webinar will be available for 24 hours on the ISIS website. That's www.ises.org. After that time, we will post the presentations and the recording into the members area. So if you are an ISIS member, simply log in with your email address and password and click on members area in the top level menu, and you will already see the library of webinars. If you are not a member, please visit our membership page and we encourage you to sign up. After the presentations, we will have a questions and answers session with your questions. So you are welcome and encouraged to ask questions at any time throughout the webinar. To ask a question, select the questions pane on your screen and type in the question. Please specify who your question is directed to. I will then assign the question to the speaker. So questions will be addressed after all the presentations in a Q&A session. The title of today's webinar is UN Sustainable Development Goal number 7. What is it and how can we achieve it? My name is Joanna Costello, working from the ISIS headquarters in Freiburg in Germany. And today we have 3 expert panelist speakers who will share their insights and answer some of your questions. Many of you who attend ISIS webinars regularly will notice that the webinar is a little bit different than our regular topics. And this is due to the recent ISIS proclamation that was published in the Solar World Congress, stating ISIS's commitment to accelerating the transformation of the global energy system to 100% renewable energy for all, used wisely and efficiently. This transformation is necessary for the long and short-term health and well-being of our planet and people. We know this goal is technically and economically achievable, and we know the challenges this entails. This is why I am particularly pleased to introduce you to 3 expert panelists working at the UN and policy level, creating programs, initiatives, and goals for better energy access, sustainable development, and a cleaner environment. With the recent agreement from the COP21 in Paris last weekend, I believe we are getting closer and closer to our goals. I am very pleased to welcome and introduce to you our 3 panelist speakers. Gill Tudor, Chief of Communications and Outreach for the Sustainable Energy for All initiative, C4All. Richenda van Leeuwen, Executive Director of Energy Access, leading the UN Foundation's work on energy access and its engagement with the C4All initiative, and Mark Radka, Chief of the UN Environment Programme's Energy, Climate and Technology Branch. Please type your questions for the panelists, for the Q&A session. And for more information about the panelist speakers, please refer to their biographies posted on the ISIS website. Our first speaker today is Gill Tudor from the Sustainable Energy for All initiative. Welcome, Gill, to the webinar. I've now made you the presenter, so if you could please unmute your microphone and share your presentation with us.
Okay, thank you very much, Joanna. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
I'll take that. Excellent. Okay, thank you very much. So I'm going to start the three presentations today with an overview of Sustainable Development Goal 7 and basically how it came about a little bit and where it fits in and why it's important. Basically, it recognizes two of the most pressing challenges facing humanity today, which is on the one hand how to end the basic injustice of poverty, and I mean poverty in its widest sense, not just energy poverty, and at the same time avoiding disastrous man-made climate change. And the key factor common to both of these challenges is energy. Sorry, I'm just, there we go. So basically, as you can see there, the latest figures that we have in Sustainable Development for All indicate that 1.1 billion people still lack access to electricity, and 2.9 billion people lack clean, safe cooking facilities. That's more than the population of India and China combined, lacking clean, safe cooking facilities. And in fact, indoor smoke from burning traditional solid fuels is killing 4.3 million people a year prematurely, mainly women and children, from the diseases caused by indoor smoke, indoor air pollution from burning those traditional fuels. Without access to energy, we simply cannot achieve sustainable development. It's that basic. Without electricity, children can't study at night, clinics can't store vaccines, businesses can't develop to provide jobs and prosperity. At the same time, without changing the way that we produce and use energy, we can't effectively keep the world within a 2-degree temperature rise, much less the 1.5 degrees that's now being talked about and targeted in the historic Paris Climate Agreement that was reached just a few days ago. Energy is the dominant contributor to climate change, accounting for about 2/3 or nearly 2/3 of all man-made greenhouse gas emissions. And its extensive and inefficient energy use, especially in the high-income countries, but not only there, which creates pollution and emits greenhouse gases. But this isn't just a concern of the rich world, because even for those who are not using energy extensively and inefficiently, they need to worry about climate change because climate change will hit and is already hitting the poorest and the most vulnerable communities the hardest. So what's so special about energy? Well, it's the master key, as you can see from these two quotes from the UN Secretary General and from the President of the World Bank. It's a central theme in the world today. If you get energy right, you unlock solutions to fighting both poverty and climate change at the same time. But to do this, we need a complete revolution in the whole way that we think about energy. It's not enough just to make a few tweaks here and there. We need a transformation in the world's energy systems. We need a game-changing approach. We need a fresh, joined-up approach that brings together, on the one hand, energy access for everybody on the planet, but on the other hand, greater energy efficiency and greater use of renewable energy. Now, this all looks pretty self-evident. Yes, of course, energy is central. We know that. But let's have a look at a bit of history. The Millennium Development Goals, which were agreed by the international community after the UN Millennium Summit in 2000, made no mention of energy, as you can see there. Extreme poverty and hunger, education, gender equality, child mortality, maternal health, etc., etc. No mention of energy whatsoever. In fact, to the extent that it's sometimes called the missing MDG, energy was just simply considered to be too political, too divisive. The UN tended to leave the whole question of energy to the experts in the international arena, to the big oil companies, to OPEC, etc., and it was very oil-focused, of course. But if you look at those, how many of them can actually be achieved properly without energy? I would suggest that there's scarcely one of them that could actually be achieved without good energy services, modern energy services. So many people in the energy and the development fields were disappointed by the MDGs. So they turned that disappointment into looking for a new model to try to put energy on the international agenda and get action moving. And the key movers were not only in diplomacy and in the international organizations, but we also started to see concern in the private sector, as well, of course, as civil society, which has long been campaigning on these issues. So there came to be a growing recognition that we need action not just in the UN arena, but by a huge range of players, and there was a need to build new kinds of partnerships. And this is where the Sustainable Energy for All initiative came in. The initiative was launched by UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in 2011. It was basically in response to the initial UN General Assembly resolution for an international year of sustainable energy for all in 2012. But the Secretary General himself really put a lot of commitment into this, and the initiative was set up establishing one goal, which is sustainable energy for all by 2030, and that would be achieved through 3 targets. So as you can see on the slides here, those 3 targets would be ensuring universal access to modern energy services, doubling the global rate of improvement in energy efficiency, and doubling the share of renewable energy in the global energy mix. And these should all be achieved by 2030. Now, this fed very directly into the whole process of agreeing on the SDGs, a process that was already bubbling, of course, long before this summer. And it made a major contribution. This movement, spearheaded by Ban Ki-moon, made a major contribution to this diplomatic process of establishing Sustainable Development Goal 7, which is the energy goal. So if you look now at the actual text of SDG 7, you'll see that it's uncannily similar to the targets of sustainable energy for all. So SDG 7 stands for ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy for all. And in those the first 3 targets, they're almost identical to the SE for all targets. There's one subtle distinction. It talks about increase substantially the share of renewable energy rather than doubling the share of renewable energy. But there's absolutely no doubt that the whole spirit of the SE for all targets has been imported pretty much wholesale into the wording of SDG 7. In fact, I'll just flick back there so that you can compare those 3 targets and then see how they translate into the first 3 targets of SDG 7. So now for the first time, this is really a new development. We have a standalone energy goal. This is really momentous. Why is it momentous? Well, it doesn't stop there because, as you can see, it's number 7, pretty much smack in the middle of the 17 goals. And the particular importance of SDG 7 is because, as I've already mentioned, energy is a fundamental enabler for many of the other proposed SDGs. In fact, virtually all of them. I did a tally I went through, and I found that something like 15 of them are linked directly or very strongly indirectly to success in SDG 7, affordable and clean energy. For example, food and water. You need energy for pumping water. You need energy for irrigation often in many areas to grow food. You need energy for purification. In areas such as the Gulf, you need energy for desalination. So there's a huge link there to the issue of clean water and sanitation, number 6, and also food, number 2, zero hunger. In other ways, the creation of jobs, small businesses. You can't really build a small business unless you have a reliable source of modern energy. Industry, self-evidently, is very often energy intensive. Sustainable cities, you need efficient ways of using energy. So for this reason, success in SDG 7 has to be front-loaded. We need fast success. It's not enough, in fact, to say, oh, we'll reach there by 2030, which is already very ambitious, of course. We actually need to start seeing success in SDG 7 long before 2030 in order for the other SDGs to actually have a chance of getting there by 2030. So just to tease out those links a little bit more, here are a couple more examples. Basic electricity supply to the home. It's very difficult for kids to pursue their education after dark by doing homework and studying if they don't have light to do it by. We also shouldn't just be thinking, excuse me, about a single light bulb. It goes further than that. The basic tools, and yes, even the basic pleasures of life, which everybody has a right to aspire to. Having a fridge, a mobile phone, perhaps a small television set, having a sewing machine. If you have a sewing machine, maybe you can, start a small business on the side doing sewing jobs, or making snacks to sell. This is a major element of, can be a major element of women's empowerment. Then if you look at another aspect, I'll explain clean energy as life in a moment, there's the whole aspect of clean cooking and health. If you are using traditional biomass, such as firewood, then you're going to have to go out and collect it, or you're going to have to make or buy charcoal. Women spend hours, and often children as well, spend hours every day in many regions of the world collecting fuel for traditional fires. It's time-consuming, it's potentially dangerous. Burning that fuel, as I said, is causing more than 4 million premature deaths every year from indoor air pollution. It's also the importance of power for health, or energy for health, can also be seen in the lack of electricity in clinics and hospitals. If you don't have electricity in a hospital, then you've got no light. If a woman is giving birth in the middle of the night and she has complications, then the midwife can't see properly to help. There's no power to run very basic medical equipment that can save the life of mothers in difficulty or newborns in difficulty. You can't store vaccines. So this is a really, really big area, the area of health, which also, again, radiates out into the whole question of gender equality, another one of the another important one of the SDGs. So you can see that it's all very, very interlinked. Women, for example, are getting involved in new markets for cleaner cook stoves, solar lamps, etc. I'm sure Richenda will be expanding on or picking up on many of these themes that I'm getting into, so I won't speak further on that now, but these are just some illustrations of how interconnected energy is with so many other development priorities. And the three targets that we have are not mutually exclusive. They're sometimes seen as separate and on the one hand, on the other hand, but in fact they back each other up. There are natural overlaps, there are synergies. You can see here, for example, this is a great example of energy access in an isolated rural area of Chile, which is being provided by a solar panel. So there's very often, for example, renewable energy sources can be the best way of getting energy to isolated areas. And the technology of renewable energy sources is developing extremely fast, and there have been dramatic cost reductions. The International Renewable Energy Agency has calculated that between 2009 and 2013, prices for solar PV modules declined by 70%. So it's becoming much, much more accessible and affordable. It can also provide, we're also hoping to see a kind of leapfrog effect where to newer, cleaner technologies, countries that don't already have a highly developed grid can leapfrog over the sort of the old technologies of the past and go straight to cleaner technologies. Similarly, energy efficiency links into access and to renewables. If you have more energy efficient appliances, you need less electricity to power them. So it's more affordable and it's easier to provide an adequate power supply. Energy efficiency, in fact, is largely an unsung hero. It's calculated that energy efficiency measures alone could deliver up to half of the emission reductions needed to put the world on a 2-degree pathway by 2020. That's according to the International Energy Agency. It also brings big cost savings for governments, businesses, households. It frees up power for other more productive uses. So it has huge potential to create jobs and increase general prosperity. So to come back to SE for All and where we fit in, SE for All is basically a rallying point. It's for the moment it's still technically an initiative, but it will be moving to be put on an international non-profit organization basis with continuing very strong links to the United Nations. The reason for that is that it's built into a very powerful platform that brings together the public sector, the private sector, and civil society. And so it's only right that a sort of new, innovative framework should be built to allow all these players to get around the table and have a say in the governance. Why these three sectors? Well, public sector, because governments need to establish the right conditions, tariffs, subsidies, regulatory framework. Sorry, brief distraction there when my phone went. Private sector, however, because we're going to need absolutely massive investment. The SE for All global tracking framework, which is a very, very broad and wide-ranging and very rigorous piece of work looking at where we are on these targets so far and how to measure them in the future, estimates that we are going to need to triple current investment in sustainable energy to more than $1 trillion a year to 2030 in order to meet the SE for All targets. Now, clearly this can't all come from the public purse. But more than that, it's not just a question of charity. There are also business opportunities, which businesses are now more and more seeing are a legitimate pathway for beyond questions of corporate social responsibility. Civil society needs to be involved because we need involvement at all levels in all parts of society, and we need an inclusive approach. We need information from the ground on what's actually working, what's not actually working. We need people at the grassroots level, as well as the bigger NGOs who have been campaigning for a long time on issues around sustainable energy. So SE for All is a very powerful platform. It has an innovative structure. It's a new kind of unified approach, bringing together, as I say, public sector, private sector, and civil society, and tying together energy access, energy efficiency, and renewable energy. And it's this combination of these three angles that underscores that fighting poverty and fighting climate change are not actually in opposition to each other, as they sometimes have been seen, and they provide a coherent package which not only would lead to provision of energy access, it's coming from an energy access perspective, but it's also an important way of mitigating climate change. And in fact, scientists have agreed that the SE for All targets taken together are compatible with a global temperature rise of no more than 2 degrees Celsius. Now, Sustainable Energy for All is not an implementing agency on the ground. That's very clear. We're not trying to duplicate the role of our partners. We're a movement. We're a multi-stakeholder partnership. And we're all about providing a space where partnerships can be built and problems can be thrashed out. So our job is to act as an advocate for change. It's to act as a catalyst for major new actions and investments in this area, and acting as a matchmaker, if you like, to bring partners together and create platforms for collaboration. We've already built a huge network in just 3 years or so since we became operational in 2012 with a very small staff in Vienna and New York. We have the backing of we're based on the convening power of both the United Nations and the World Bank, because both Ban Ki-moon and Jim Kim co-chair our high-level advisory board. And that advisory board also includes global leaders from government, business, finance, civil society, international organizations. And it's truly high level. We have also built a network of regional and thematic hubs, which are our sort of presence on the ground when we're talking about regional hubs, and those regional hubs are generally handled by the regional development banks, such as the African Development Bank, Asian Development Bank, etc. IRENA, International Renewable Energy Agency, is our renewables hub. The World Bank, for example, is our knowledge hub. It has taken the lead in preparing the global tracking framework that I mentioned just now. We have, Richenda will talk more about the Energy Access Practitioners Network, so I won't get into that now. These are just some numbers you can see here. We have high impact opportunity partnerships. These are basically a kind of focus on areas where we see particular potential for fast results in areas that can be as diverse as clean cook stoves and ending non-emergency gas flaring in the oil and gas industry around the world. We are also working very intensively on energy efficiency. We've built a global energy efficiency accelerator platform, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it's basically a way of boosting public-private partnerships to advance energy efficiency in key sectors. At the moment, we're doing it on lighting, appliances, buildings, vehicle fuel efficiency, district heating and cooling systems, and industry, and there will be more to come. And as I say, this is supported by a very small global facilitation team in Vienna and in New York. Well, how are we doing? Well, already since SE for All was formed, pledges made to date in support of SE for All can halve energy poverty by 2030, which is pretty extraordinary, and that's just from commitments made by the European Commission, the United States, and individual European countries. More than 90 million people have already gained access to sustainable energy under commitments made for SE for All since the Rio+20 conference in 2012. And the Advisory Board's Finance Committee has done some work on financing, very important work on financing, and it's identified innovative financing instruments that could quickly generate an additional $120 billion a year to 2020. Now, of course, compared with the need for $1 trillion a year, that's still relatively small, but the point is that it's fast and it's a start. And it's a very, it's tapping new ways of looking at financing instruments. Now, it's not enough just to set targets. Obviously, you need to be able to measure progress against those targets. So we, as I mentioned earlier, we have more than 20 of our partners, led by the World Bank and the IEA, have developed this global tracking framework, which is available online, and it provides a very rigorous way of tracking these goals, these targets, and by extension, logically, it should be, well, it will help to support tracking for SDG 7 itself. So in conclusion, just to wrap up, 2015 obviously has been a key year, a historic year, with the SDGs followed this month by the climate conference in Paris. As the UN Secretary General has said, we're the first generation that can end poverty, and we're the last that has a chance to curb climate change. And SDG 7 is absolutely central to this dual challenge. And the Sustainable Energy for All initiative is already engaged to support action towards SDG 7. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gill. It really is fascinating to hear how central energy, what a central role it plays, especially with energy efficiency, access and renewable energy. So thank you for that overview. We have some questions that have come in for you, but I'm going to hold off and we're going to answer them in the questions and answers session at the end. So if you have more questions for Gill, please just type them in and we'll try to get to them at the end. Okay, well then I would like to introduce our second speaker, and that is Richenda van Leeuwen. She's the Executive Director of Energy Access, leading the UN's foundation work on energy access and its engagement with the SE for All initiative. So welcome, Richenda, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Gill, for such a terrific overview of the whole Sustainable Energy for All initiative. And just a correction that yes, I'm the Executive Director for Energy Access, and not only the Energy Access Practitioner Network as mentioned in the first slide. So as Gill has already outlined, on specifically the energy access goal of the three Sustainable Energy for All goals, which I particularly focus on, access to power to help with, as Gill's already alluded to, improving education, improving health, improving income generation activities, improving agricultural productivity, and I would also say since energy poverty disproportionately affects women, very much it helps to improve gender equity and helping to make sure that women's needs are mainstreamed as well. So we have a fantastic opportunity to really deploy the best in class of today's renewable energy solutions, as well as ramping up and as we can bringing in the innovations that many of you within the International Solar Energy Society, particularly those that are working at research institutions, are focusing on. So we're already seeing, just even over the last years since we started Sustainable Energy for All, improvements in how we integrate different solar and other renewables technologies together with the best of today's software solutions, and then energy storage, where we still have some way to go with improvements, but really helping to bring those together alongside the financing that's needed, the deployment that's needed, the regulatory environment that's needed to make sure that in fact we have the ability to see that they are deployed as effectively as possible at both the household level but also at the community level, in order from the UN standpoint really to help address a development issue. So it's very exciting, particularly as we've seen so many changes in the deployment of renewables. As Gill's already mentioned, the cost of solar panels particularly has come down massively, and where in fact the primary market was really in OECD countries just even 5-6 years ago, there's really been a sea change of being able to bring those renewable energy solutions now very effectively into developing country contexts. However, we do still see, as Gill mentioned, that 1.1 billion people do not have access to even basic electricity. Even in the last several years, we looked at, the IFC had determined that about $37 billion was being spent annually on rudimentary forms of lighting, particularly kerosene, but also candles, flashlights using dry cell batteries that are just about the most expensive form of electricity that you can be using, and really not meeting the needs of the people that were utilizing them. We see that, yes, I mean, cell phone charging is already a ubiquitous need for electricity. So people have cell phones, but they may not actually have the means to charge them. So we see that often they will have to send them to a nearby town where there's a car battery, if there's no grid, so that they can actually have the cell phone charged to be able to either conduct business or keep in touch with families, and so many other uses for cell phones that we see. Indeed, in fact, in medical clinics, we're seeing now the use of cell phones more and more in terms of being able to capture epidemiological data for the healthcare system. And now with the smartphones, we're seeing more and more smart apps where you can actually diagnose disease using your cell phone. So being able to keep that cell phone charged is one application that's particularly useful. Lighting also is another application, and we shouldn't underestimate the value in a household of being able to move beyond a candle or a kerosene for lighting, not only because of the danger of fire, but also because of the toxicity of the fumes that come from using kerosene as an indoor lighting source. Also, the quality of the light that you get is not particularly good by today's standards. LEDs particularly are being deployed now as the norm in many developing country contexts because of the efficiency over incandescence, of course, but also CFLs, and without, again, the toxicity of the mercury that you get in CFL bulbs, but also very, very low wattage that's required for a very high number of lumens. So they've just been game-changing in terms of being able to bring the best of today's global lighting technologies at a low cost that is affordable, particularly when you can craft the right financing arrangements to people in developing country contexts. So since we're talking primarily to a solar audience here today, I just wanted to touch for a second on the overall value of where solar has an entry point into sustainable energy for all, and particularly achieving the energy access goal. The International Energy Agency has projected that in order to bring universal energy access to people, yes, we need grid extension, and we are seeing very much deployments of renewable energy solutions, including large-scale solar PV, being connected to existing grids, helping with strengthening those grids, helping with improving the quality of the grid power. So that's one aspect. However, we've seen, and the projections are that, in fact, to achieve universal energy access by 2030, a lot of people in rural, remote areas and areas where it's deemed by their own country that it's cost prohibitive because of low population density and also low ability to pay, that in fact the national grid will not necessarily get to those people in the next 10 to 15 years. This has created both a challenge but also an opportunity, particularly for the private sector to come in terms of fully commercial and social entrepreneurial solution sets, to focus on delivering the mini-grid solutions and then the completely off-grid solutions, such as solar home systems, and at the entry level, just even basic solar-powered improved lanterns that can also potentially charge a cell phone. So we are projecting moving forward that the off-grid component will continue to play a leading role in terms of helping us to be able to reach energy access. We also see the value of hybrid solutions, particularly on the mini-grid side, where you may be able to integrate solar panels alongside a small wind generator with diesel as backup where it's needed, again, depending on the load requirements, depending on the time of use, and depending on the ability of the community to pay for those energy services, which I can't emphasize enough has been a key constraint when you have very, very low income households. We don't want to really be burdening them with having to pay all the capital costs for these solution sets if there are supports that can come in to help with underwriting some of those costs. At the same time, though, we are seeing these entry-level solutions now being priced at what the household has been paying previously for candles, for kerosene, for dry cell batteries, and we are looking at ways now where it can be made affordable, either through banks providing long-term patient leasing or loan arrangements over 5, 6, 7 years that mean that the monthly or daily repayment, or sometimes a seasonal repayment if you're only making money twice a year, is affordable to that household. And then we're also seeing, as a particular innovation in the sector now, the use of things like mobile money with what's called pay-as-you-go arrangements, so that somebody can be paying, again, on a daily or a weekly basis using their cell phone or scratch cards for a regular payment that is affordable at that household level, so they don't have to pay for the full price of the asset up front, and in some cases they actually never fully own the asset. What they own is the energy service that they're paying for, more like a micro utility. Gill had mentioned the sort of the 5 tiers within the global tracking framework put together by Sustainable Energy for All. The World Bank really led that work, and I just put this here indicative to show the different types of solar solutions that we are seeing very much from the initial switch over from kerosene lighting, also for children being able to do their homework on the left side of the slide, through such companies as D-Light Design, Greenlight Planet, and others that have been able to drive down the cost for these entry-level solutions to less than $10 US, and in fact now coming to about $5 US retail in 1 or 2 markets. Again, they've been able to do this not with compromising quality, but with really being able to deploy the best of today's combination of batteries, of solar PV, and some smart software to enable these to be affordable even for very low-income families. However, we're not stopping there. As Gill mentioned, you know, everybody has essentially the right to be able to use energy services, to have the solutions available at the household level, at the community level. And so we're also seeing very much a strong push for household level solutions like solar home systems, and again with and Mark will, I'm sure, talk about this a lot, with some of the super efficient appliances today, where you can have a 15-watt LED television in an off-grid DC array that is affordable as a package to that household. Again, you don't need to have a 50 or 100-watt solar panel anymore. And many of these solutions are available DC, so without having to pay for the inverter, because that becomes more costly. And then from there, we're seeing nanogrids, microgrids, and then grid connection. Again, it's not that we are saying that you should start with 1 and go to 5. What we're really seeing is the ability to pay, to deploy. Regulatory environments vary, and that there are these suite of solutions out there, many of which are being provided by the private sector. So here at the UN Foundation, as part of our contribution to Sustainable Energy for All, in 2011 we set up the Energy Access Practitioner Network, which has really been a platform for bringing in particularly the off-grid sector back into the global dialogue around how we achieve sustainable energy for all, but also to be able to provide a platform for knowledge sharing, for focusing on where we still need, whether it's better innovations on technology, on financing, whether it's sharing about quality, helping to provide the off-grid sector voice back into countries as they determine how they can solve their own customer and consumer energy access issues, and making sure that in fact the vibrancy of what we are seeing globally in the private sector is brought back to bear within a UN context as well. So we have today about 2,000 members, just over that, in the network, covering a range of solution sets, really focusing on delivery of these solutions into a range of developing countries. They're operating in 170 countries. Not all of those are those with a great energy access issue, but the vast majority are, and we're seeing a lot of members in East African countries like Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and elsewhere around the world. Also India, that has the largest single number of people that do not have access to electricity in terms of numerical, just on the numbers side, even though we've seen very recently that their government there has made some very large commitments around achieving universal energy access in a shorter time frame. Collectively, in the last year, our membership reported helping to bring energy access to about 30 million people, again, using different types of products and services, and we see that number set to grow as we move forward. We are very much looking at the innovative side of how we combine the technology solutions, the financing solutions, the software solutions, and we hope more and more the regulatory solutions, as it's not only an energy policy issue, but it also becomes an issue around looking at internet, looking at how countries and governments also look at the digital footprint, if you will, and really bringing those two together very much. Last week in Paris at COP21, we released an investment directory summarizing the needs immediately in the sector for additional financing by 200 of the leading companies, NGOs, social entrepreneurs, reflecting at least 1.3 billion of immediate financing needs to help them to be able to deploy at the scale and grow as fast as they would like to do so. So if there are any investors in ISIS who are on the webinar today, we would be delighted to be able to share that more broadly with you following this webinar. Just very quickly in conclusion, the majority of the funding is for solar PV with significant need for capital for microgrids, where there's a lot of excitement, but I would argue that we're not yet seeing the full uptake of their potential necessarily at ground level in many of these markets. Just a final concluding slide to give a sense of some of the companies and the non-profits that we're working with in sustainable energy for all on the off-grid side, and I welcome your questions as we move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Richenda, for that excellent presentation. We have very nice questions coming in, which I'll save for the end for our questions and answer session. Thank you. And we'll move straight on to our third and last speaker. That is Mark Radka, the Chief of the UN Environment Programme's Energy, Climate and Technology Branch. So welcome, Mark, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Joanna. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Very good. So I would begin by recapping why energy matters in the context of sustainable development and climate change. I'm going to take us, in a sense, upward now that we've drilled down a little bit from Gill's presentation in Richenda's presentation, and go back to energy in the larger context of the SDGs and energy and environment. So to restate what has been made clear, energy is absolutely necessary if billions of people are going to move out of poverty. You see the numbers, the fact that they're similar but slightly different from those that were presented by Gill shows one of the challenges we're up against. We still don't have very accurate measurement systems, and the rounding error in estimates of the number of people without access to modern energy services is in the order of 100 million people, just to show you the sort of challenges we're all facing. But we do know that energy is needed for development, and cleaner energy is needed, of course, if we are to achieve the deep reductions in GHG emissions. The thoughtful analysis that's coming out of COP21, I believe, has made very clear that sustainable energy, renewable energy, energy efficiency, in a sense, really needs to be seen as an opportunity. So for those of you who spend your professional days working on aspects of solar energy research and development and deployment, my sense is that the future looks like a very good one. The focus is often these days on the current energy system's contribution to climate change, but we need to recall or keep in mind that fossil energy, or the current energy system, is also a contributor to other human health and environmental problems. The two previous speakers talked about indoor and outdoor air pollution, and hence the human health links. We all have seen pictures of Beijing when smog episodes are underway. That's by no means confined to China. Other mega cities in Asia in particular have horrendous air quality. the impacts from extraction, processing, transportation, and use of fossil fuels are still with us. We tend to maybe forget about them in developed countries, but they are a growing problem in many developing countries. And even in developed countries, issues such as air quality arising from growing use of vehicles are still a problem. I live and work in Paris, and it was only last year that many of you might have seen photos where Paris looked a little bit like Beijing or New Delhi in terms of the air quality, largely brought about by the emission of fine particulates from diesel combustion in diesel light-duty vehicles. The energy and sustainable development, Gill has run through that. Goal number 7, she made clear, and I agree very much with the reasons why we are celebrating that energy has its own goal. It has a sort of distinctive place there, number 7, as she said, somewhere in the middle, but with links to many of the other goals. And without colluding with her, I put black stars on the other sustainable development goals where I thought that energy actually had a very dominant link. And one could argue that actually all of the goals are not achievable without access to energy. And goal 13, climate action, is absolutely unachievable without access or with clean energy. And this points to the reality that all of the goals are to some extent linked. If you look at the 17 goals as a system, we find the same logic as was explained by the previous speakers in the context of goal 7, where the access goal, the renewables goal, and the efficiencies goal can really only be met simultaneously if one treats them as some kind of interconnected system. And this logic continues up in a sense to the 17 goals if one takes them as a system. I believe this is more so than in the case of energy, but you can find interconnections between all of the goals if you think creatively. Hungry children do not learn well, so hunger makes more difficult the goals related to quality education. And it's difficult, if not impossible, to think about how one would achieve justice if there is pervasive gender inequality. Now, there is a school of thought that says that energy didn't have to be its own goal, because it could have been part of goal 17, which I'll come back to in a moment, but the partnerships. Goal 17, in a sense, is the place where the overarching or cross-cutting goals were placed, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But the idea that the goals are indeed quite interconnected is if not made clear, at least illustrated in part through this next slide. This diagram was prepared for a workshop in New York earlier this year. It is not complete because the full diagram gets very, very unwieldy. But there are 17 goals, as we've mentioned, and 169 separate targets. And what this array attempts to show is the links between the goals, and it's the result of using network analysis techniques that shows how the SDGs are connected, with some goals being more connected to many other goals through multiple targets. Some are more weakly connected with the rest of the system. But the point I'm trying to make is that the SDGs really need to be approached as a system, or at least consideration given so that the individual goals are not thought of sitting in silos and are attacked as sort of individual challenges and actions are taken that are ignorant of activities related to other goals. And the next slide shows kind of a reverse view of this, and I think it might be one that I would hope stimulates thinking for those of you in the solar energy business. And that is, it's a different way of looking at interconnectedness. where in the upper half what you see is the environment and climate change as affected by black carbon or aerosol emissions and their impact on the climate system. So black carbon is what we used to call soot or particulate matter. Scientists now understand that it has a very large influence on radiative forcing and hence a considerable impact on short-term global warming. So black carbon fits into the category of climate forcers known as short-lived climate pollutants, and it is also a strong contributor to degraded air quality, both indoor and outdoor. The diagram is something like what you might come up with if you looked at the SDGs from the perspective of someone who is very interested or motivated in reducing levels of black carbon, and how the SDGs might provide a hook or a landing spot for some of the articulation of actions that need to be taken. So we see in the lower left-hand corner SDG 15, which relates to terrestrial ecosystems and life on land, where the open burning of forested lands, savannas, forest fires, agricultural processes, land clearing processes emit a lot of particulate matter and unburned carbon into the atmosphere. And you might ask, how does that link to climate change? Well, through atmospheric deposition, transport and deposition, these particles end up, for example, on glaciers in the Himalayas and cause those glaciers to melt faster than they would otherwise. Similarly, SDG 9 or 9.2 relates to sustainable industrialization, and as I said, the entire upper half of the screen really is climate change and interference with the global climate system. So the thought I'd like to leave you with is, if one were to take and map out the SDGs, all of them, and look at renewable energy or solar energy systems as they map onto the SDGs, I think it would be an interesting exercise to see what are the entry points for your area of interest, your professional area of engagement, and how they work with or can interact with the SDGs. Now, at this point, you're probably wondering, so what? Why does all of this matter? The SDGs really need to be considered as the building blocks for the post-2015 development agenda. And that is, they set a normative framework for how governments think and how they prioritize actions, how they allocate money, particularly in the area of development assistance, and for those countries that are on the receiving end, how they prioritize government capital expenditures. So this is a little bit like changing the course of a large ship. It's not immediately apparent, but what is very clear with the MDGs is that over the years, they actually do bring about rather substantial shifts in the way that governments frame and deal with problems. And of course, it extends beyond governments then to the private sector and other areas of society. In some sense, of course, the old adage, you cannot manage what you don't measure, and the flip side is true. What you do measure often determines the direction of management, and hence there is a large focus now within the SDG, let's say, world on determining indicators for those 169 targets. The future will see much more emphasis, of course, on implementation. Each country has an obligation or a responsibility to implement and report on how it is achieving SDGs. Developing countries will require assistance. Technology and finance are key to moving forward, and we need some really good thinking about how to accelerate the rate of innovation and the rate of development of new technology or adaptation of existing technology and its deployment into areas that would benefit from that technology. And again, reporting is very important, and hence a current focus on data and statistics management, reporting mechanisms, and how to integrate the SDGs into national statistical offices in both developed and developing countries. My final thought is really two thoughts, in a sense a recycling and a re-emphasis on two thoughts. First, please do think of the SDGs as a system. The whole approach over the past several years has been one in which the goal is to bring about cohesion among different goals, different development goals, and how to get away from a kind of one-dimensional silo thinking. Here, the ultimate goal is to avoid solving one problem and through those solutions, create another. We really, the people who have spent a lot of time thinking and working this out in laborious processes are stressing time and time again integration and multidimensional thinking. And this is surprisingly challenging when you're dealing with sectoral experts and government structures that are organized in a kind of a linear fashion to deal with agriculture or to deal with fisheries or to deal with education or health. So it's the integration element that's very important as well. And energy is critical in providing the web that might allow for or facilitate that kind of integration. The second is it is very tempting, I think, to dismiss the SDGs as words connected with aspirational goals. But I truly believe, having watched the impact of the MDGs, that the Sustainable Development Goals will very much change the way we perceive development and the way that governments and society as a whole approach the overarching goal of development and sustainable development. And I would encourage those of you who are a part of this webinar to figure out how you can contribute to the SDGs, but in the reverse way, to benefit from the changes that they bring about in government thinking and priorities and programming. There is, again, a great deal of emphasis on innovation, on technology and financing. And my challenge to you, or my appeal to you, is to think how solar energy and the solar energy community can contribute to the realization of the goals over the next 15 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that excellent presentation and the food for thought, definitely for ISIS members and for everybody watching this webinar. We're going to go straight into the questions and answers session because there are lots and lots of questions coming in. So let me just change the screen. Okay. So our first question is actually going to our first speaker, so that's for Gill. And this person asks, how does the Sustainable Energy for All initiative quantify universal energy access? So she asks, do you say that this is achieved when everyone has one light bulb or when everyone has access to multiple appliances? How is this defined? So Gill, if you could unmute your microphone and let's see if we can answer that one.
Sure, that's a brilliant question because it's absolutely right that it's not sufficient just to say, right, okay, that's one light bulb, you're done, tick, move on to the next household. Obviously, energy provision is much more than that, and how you quantify it is a very, very complex process. And it's exactly this complex process that the World Bank and others have been working on through the Global Tracking Framework, where they've developed a very innovative framework called the multi-tier framework, where basically they've developed, you'll find more information about this on our website and also on the, well, through our website you can get to it, or the World Bank website. But basically what it's doing is trying to quantify the level of access, not just in terms of access to power, can you run a light bulb, or can you also run a fridge, or can you run an air conditioner, or whatever. But it's also looking at other aspects of whether or not you can say that you have full access to energy. For example, you might, in theory, have 24-hour-a-day access to electricity, but what if you have constant power cuts? You might, in theory, have access to electricity, but if the voltage is so variable and unreliable that your machines keep blowing, or your equipment is damaged or won't run properly, then again you have a problem, and you can't really say that you're getting, proper full access to energy. So these are all very, very complex issues, but basically the World Bank is working on that under the umbrella of SE for All in developing this multi-tier access framework.
Thank you very much for that answer. We'll go straight to the next question, and that is a question for Richenda. And he asks, why is solar thermal technology always missing from the picture? Solar thermal is a totally mature technology providing space heating, hot water, and water treatment, including distillation and desalination. So if you could make a comment on that, Richenda. If you could please unmute your microphone.
Yeah, thanks. It's a great question and certainly not missing from the picture at all. I mean, small-scale solar thermal and large-scale solar thermal, I would say, for grid connectivity is one aspect, but we're still sort of seeing that just taking off in the developed world with some of the large-scale solar thermal that's come online over the last years. But small-scale solar thermal, absolutely. I mean. Hot water is solar for hot water heating particularly is immensely valuable. We see it deployed in some countries. It's actually mandated that you need to have solar for hot water. I think the reason that I've been emphasizing, though, the provision of solar and the use of solar specifically for electricity and energy services comes back a little bit to what Gill was saying, which is that under the SE for All goal, we're really looking at how we can be deploying energy and electricity to remove the constraints to certain facets of development, which is why we don't have a sort of a one-size-fits-all, it's solved now. It's really looking at how we can target and use those energy services to help with improvements in other aspects of life. So solar thermal, solar hot water, absolutely is critically important for many contexts. However, I would say that the value of the electricity is one where we still see that it's not being ramped up fast enough, far enough, affordable enough for very low-income communities and very low-income households, and one where we already have the technologies that we need to be able to deploy this, and the financing models, I would say we're getting to that point where in fact there really isn't that constraint anymore to being able to do this at scale, and we're beginning to see that shift in that direction. So absolutely it's a both and. Within the Energy Access Practitioner Network, I would say solar PV is vastly more represented than solar thermal, but we certainly invite solar thermal providers to come and join us as well.
Joanna, could I jump in?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, from a unit perspective, solar thermal is an absolutely good technology, and of course it's China that dominates in the number of installed systems and also in the global manufacturing base. But so developed and developing countries both have needs for domestic hot water, and in countries that I'm familiar with where we had programs, some dating many years now, I can think of Tunisia where we helped bring about a conversion of many households through commercial bank lending, but conversion from solar hot water, domestic solar hot water systems that relied on imported LPG that was subsidized and hence was a burden on the Treasury, but also resulted in the emission of greenhouse gases, to solar hot water heating systems with savings for the consumer, savings for the government, and benefits to the environment. So it's absolutely a great technology.
Okay, thank you very much. And also I'd like to mention at this point that ISIS is a member of the Energy Access Practitioners Network, also representing all solar energy technologies there. Good. Well, I'll move on to the next question. We have so many questions coming in, so I'm going to go straight to it. This question is about financing. So let's see. What kinds of financing innovations are being put in place for new technologies when banks require 5 to 10 years of existing projects before awarding it? So can anybody comment on this question?
I'd be happy to take that on, and just to say that again, it's very variable by country and by context. So one of the things that we've seen is that obviously the larger the project, the more tailored the financing needs to be, whether it's through company debt, company equity, project debt, project equity, and national financing institutions have very varied mindsets at this point around what to them is an asset that they know, that they understand, that they're comfortable financing, and what is not yet there. That's on the one hand. I would also say, though, that with a lot of the entry-level applications for solar technology, in fact, what we've seen is the two types of financing that have been most needed have been the company-level financing, again, because this is not a mature sector yet where it's well understood. So sometimes commercial capital has been slow to come in. At the same time, the consumer financing has been absolutely critical, particularly when you're looking at very low-income households that just do not have the cash in hand to be able to do an outright purchase. And there it's been different iterations of, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, bank financing, where in fact maybe they do not require a large down payment, or they do not require you to already have a sort of a credit profile with them. In fact, in some countries, the purchase of a solar asset over time has actually become your sort of credit score for that bank to then lend to you in other areas as well. And then we're really beginning to see this change also with not so much microfinance per se, but with the mobile money payments and the ability to pay at what your household can afford from a consumer financing perspective, and then building that back into the business model of the company so that the asset is either sort of leased, is just really a service that you are purchasing as a consumer, or that it's purchased over sufficient time that those immediate payments don't become burdensome. So it really depends. There's a vast scope depending on what the type of the asset, or whether it's a microgrid. It has a very different financial structure. I would say overall, however, we are still seeing that there are some significant issues that we are trying to overcome, particularly in terms of international capital coming into some countries where we've had currency devaluation, and that can be very risky for the company to take on that currency risk, and we're trying to look at how we can help to strengthen the architecture to address that, and issues like that we're sort of really navigating on a country by country and at times transaction by transaction basis.
Thank you very much. I'll go on to the next question. And this person is saying there's been a lot of talk about reduced costs of solar panels, but not much has been discussed about the quality and listings and certifications. And throughout Central America, she's seen so many substandard panels being used, including pirate ones, that really undermine the whole effort. She says she'd appreciate some comments on this topic of quality versus quantity, and says that she knows that NREL has started discussing this more broadly, but which she hasn't seen being implemented or put into practice. So if any of the panelists can comment on that one, please.
I could offer something on it, but it's kind of in a parallel direction. We have had good discussions with some governments in dominant manufacturing countries about the long-term benefits of establishing a, let's say, greater credibility for manufactured goods coming out of those countries, and the benefits to faster maturation of global markets for high quality products. This happened to be in the context of LEDs, which I think are similar to the problems that you mentioned in Central America for PV systems are similar. So there are a number of ways one has to attack it. Standards need to exist in the country. You need to have awareness about the, let's say, the monitoring and enforcement, which means laboratory quality control testing of panels. These are often best when you do them on a regional basis or look at regional markets. I don't think it would make sense for every country in Central America, for example, to make its own standards and to then set up an independent quality control and assurance system. So economies of scale of banding together with neighbors. But we are in UNEP and we're not unique, of course, but trying to up the game in a sense by working with importing countries and producing countries and manufacturers to get quality standards in place. Richenda might be able to say something about the Global Off-Grid Lighting Association and efforts underway to do the same for lighting products.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Thanks, Mark. I wanted to just add to what you said on two fronts. First of all, there is a global standard already around solar home systems put out by the International Electrotechnical Commission. Sorry, if this is too geeky, but there's a standard 62257. Most of the countries, I'd have to look, but I think all of the countries in Central America, as well as many others around the world, are members of the IEC. They have access to those standards. And we certainly encourage countries to adopt those as their own standards. It's an issue, however, that we are seeing in many different markets around the world. When I've been in India recently, you're seeing a lot of fake products come in, purporting to be the well-known brand names that in fact are tried and true. And just to Mark's point about the Global Off-Grid Lighting Association, the International Finance Corporation, which is the sort of the father of that particular initiative, or the mother, or the parents, I should say, has been focusing very much on validation and testing of small-scale solar lighting products. So they've had a quality assurance program that really sort of says this particular product has been through this testing, and we can say that it reaches a certain threshold of performance and durability. And so there is that data point specifically for the very small-scale solar lights. But more broadly, I would say it's an issue across many markets, and it's something that, yes, governments can take on in terms of having their own internal standards on that, but it's also a consumer awareness issue. Solar is still new to many markets. Consumers don't have brands that are well known, that are well regarded, and it's an emerging issue. And one of the best ways to tackle this, when Kenya dealt with this about 9 or 10 years ago, was that they had an expose in the national newspaper around which were the very poor performing solar panels and which were better performing. And in fact, that helped the then customer base to have a better understanding of kind of market differentiation. But for markets where it's very, very new, I would say that's still only emerging.
Very interesting. Thank you very much for that answer. We have another question here that I'm going to direct to Gill. And it's from one gentleman asking if you are familiar with the concept of energy sufficiency. And he asks, shouldn't we advocate energy sufficiency as a first step and efficiency as the second? Gill, if you could unmute your microphone.
Yeah, I'm unmuted.
Oh, great, thank you.
Sorry, that was a pregnant pause because I was just thinking how to answer. I'll be very honest that I personally have not come across the concept of energy sufficiency.
I haven't either.
Whereas, yeah, I think the point about energy efficiency is, and I'm sure that Mark also would have something to add on this, energy efficiency, it has been called the first fuel or the hidden fuel or the invisible fuel because its capacity or its potential for making the energy that we have go further. You get more for less or more for the same, or the same for less. Either way, any way you cut it, it has tremendous potential to help extend access because it reduces the strain on existing systems and on new systems. So it makes what it's possible to provide, it makes it go further. It also has a great potential for cost savings and for job creation. And all in all, it's very much to be seen stacking up against the actual various ways of generating energy simply by avoiding energy use. But I'm not sure if that really answers the question, because I confess my ignorance on the concept of energy sufficiency.
We've introduced the term energy sufficiency into this webinar now, so that's great. Okay, good. Here's a question that could go to all of the panelists. And one person is asking, he says, we see small villages accept smartphones leapfrogging the wired phone systems. So how can we get these villages to leapfrog the ongoing diesel fuel usage to the solar and wind solutions, and to do it quickly? It's happening, but we need to scale up for 3 billion people. So
absolutely, couldn't agree more. We need everybody's efforts. So we need the good efforts of everybody who's a member of the International Solar Energy Society. Whether you're focused on the research side and helping us with better systems integration. Coming back to the previous question, energy efficiency is so valuable for energy access, because also now we can do things with the same appliances that give the same quality of energy services, but with much less draw in terms of the electrical power. So it's really an all of the above. It's getting the financing right. It's also getting the regulatory policy right as well. And there's a lot of work going on through Sustainable Energy for All with its partners like the African Development Bank and others on working with countries around their own particular regulatory policy that can help to either support or unfortunately at times impede the rapid development of the sector. So couldn't agree with you more.
Thank you very much.
I think you touched on it, and actually underlying our whole discussion this afternoon is the concept of the service. And it's important to remember that the energy access goal is written not about access to energy, but about access to modern energy services. And I think, to draw the analogy to the cell phone, not one person in a million or maybe 10 million, whether they're in developed or developing countries, has any idea of what is inside their cell phone. They're just happy to have it and be able to use it as a reliable communication device. Mm-hmm. So we don't, or the thing to do is to avoid focusing on the technology. And this is very difficult for technical people, of course, and I put myself in there, and to focus on the service that people are demanding, and that will unleash the markets, and that is actually, I think, the way to move quickly. Really look at customers and what they can afford and what they're interested in acquiring in terms of the service.
Thank you. I have one or two more questions, and then we need to wrap up. This question is directed to you, Mark, and it's this person says, the food, water, energy nexus is increasingly getting momentum, particularly for its ability to solve development problems through a systems approach. Do you see this nexus approach would have an important role in achieving SDGs in a systems approach?
Yes, I think so. And in a sense, it's a sort of a microcosm of the larger, well, the point I was trying to make about the SDGs is being interconnected in some manner. So it is important to approach these goals or the actions one would take to help realize the goals as systems, and realize that there are a lot of interconnected parts. And I stated earlier, you don't want to create new problems while solving old problems. Unfortunately, the history of, let's say, the environmental movement is rife with examples of solving one problem and creating another that we didn't realize at the time, but 5 years, 10 years later is apparent. Just it's a bit of a sideline, but you could say if we are to deploy solar home systems on a massive scale, we in UNEP would be the awkward ones raising our hand and saying, are there adequate provisions for dealing with the batteries that would be in a system? Or are we just for planting the seeds of a problem where there are lots of lead acid batteries or their equivalent, distributed in a manner that makes it hard to collect them or to know what the end of life is? So food, water, energy, I think it's great that that the nexus is being discussed and taken up. It does make it makes problems more complex, or the discussions about them complex, because you have to bring other people to the table, and so there is a tendency to take shortcuts, but those shortcuts are in the long run not what we really want to take.
Can I just add a point on that as well, which is it's food, water, energy is one side, but Gill had mentioned this briefly. Energy health nexus, massive one, and it really does touch on several of the SDGs, not only in terms of reductions of indoor air pollution by adopting modern fuels for cooking and technologies for cooking, having access to electricity, outdoor air pollution as well. We see from similar emissions. Mark has seen that, tying back into climate and the climate change SDG as well. And then also at the community level, very much we're seeing the tie-in between having adequate power and being able to deliver the full suite of modern health services as well. And at UN Foundation, we have an initiative specifically addressing that one, because we're seeing that too many health clinics in developing countries still don't have any at times or adequate power, and that with the best will in the world, the most fantastic doctor cannot adequately perform surgery after dark without access to electricity.
Thank you, Richenda. And maybe the last question, because I have 2 or 3 people who've asked the same thing, and they're really fascinated by what's being discussed here in this webinar, and are asking how their institutes can join this network.
So we would encourage joining as a partner with Sustainable Energy for All, first and foremost, and Gill can provide the right mechanisms to do that. To join the Energy Access Practitioner Network, you just go to our website, energyaccess.org, and there's a way to be able to link to registration through that, and we'd welcome additional members.
Great, thank you very much. And as our members know, that ISIS is a member of the Energy Access Practitioners Network as well. Okay, well that was all we have time for the questions. We got through so many of them, which is great. And the recording, if you want to listen to the answers again, will be available on the ISIS website in about 2 hours after the live webinar finishes. Good. Well, I'd like to finish up by thanking all of our excellent speakers, our excellent panelist speakers, for sharing their knowledge and expertise with us today. Thank you very, very much. And last but not least, thank you to our audience for joining us today, for being so interactive, for sending us your questions. And we look forward to welcoming you at another ISIS webinar or event. That's all we have time for today. You can view the webinar recording on the ISIS website and also in the ISIS members area. So please keep checking that for updates. That's under join.isis.org. Then one more thank you to Gill, to Richenda, to Mark for being here with us today. I wish all of you a lovely day, morning, evening, afternoon, whatever time it is in your part of the world. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.